Yes, sir. We have 8 speakers, so in line with council's policy, each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes to speak.
So each speaker will have 3 minutes. We will strictly adhere to that time frame, and I would ask the speakers to address the amendment only. Please call the speakers, Ms. Cotter.
Chris Wynn.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. My name is Christopher Wynn, civil engineer, representing BK&M and Ralph Dude on this project located at 5051 South National Avenue in Springfield, Missouri. At the City Council meeting when we had the public hearing on September 23rd, the following questions were asked. Can a strip mall go here? Can a Dollar General go here? Can a tattoo shop go here? Could a vape shop go here? If it's not a standalone vape shop. The answer to all these questions were yes. So Mr. Duda, with the help of Abe McClure, fellow council member, went back and we prepared an amendment to address these concerns the city council have. We put a limitation on strip centers. We made it so that they can't be flat roof strip centers. They have to have a pitched roof. We got rid of vape shops. We got rid of dollar stores. We got rid of tattoo parlors. Whether you like the amendment or not, whether you like the zoning or case or not, it's another concession that we've made because ultimately these uses are not what the developer envisions on this corner. So it was just an opportunity for us to go back, make an improvement to the existing zoning or the proposed zoning ordinance to better serve this corner. We put these limitations on. So ultimately, it was done out of good faith to benefit the bill. I think that it is a positive amendment, and we hope that tonight that you guys can see that Mr. Duda and BK&M have time and time again done everything that they can. They've taken the request of City Council. They've taken requests of the Traffic Department. They've taken requests of the city and the neighborhood, and they've put together forth a zoning ordinance to make it so that this corner could be developed in a way that would be beneficial to the city of Springfield. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Wynn? Sir, thank you.
Thank you.
Donna Heeman.
Good evening, council.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity and for your service. My name is Donna Heeman. I live at 1039 East University Street in Springfield. We don't see any major differences in the amended COD that makes the developer's proposal any less damaging to the affected neighborhood or Springfield as a whole. We do not see it excluding intrusion into the neighborhood's interior. We do not see it protecting homes and families on East University, the interior street, which would be directly affected. We do not see it mandating entrance only on Sunshine to protect the safety and well-being of all the people, pets, and the economic vitality of the affected neighborhood. We do not see an amendment that includes a change to vertical scale that would not undermine the people and the affected neighborhood. What we do see is the continued prohibition of private or public parks, which actually would be an outstanding use of the raised properties ancillary to creating a new turn lane and other traffic improvements if council were to vote no against the rezoning and then would later consider these improvements that would benefit the city as a whole. We see in the amendment the prohibition of outdoor playgrounds. We see the addition of the prohibition of daycares. We see the addition of allowing comprehensive marijuana-infused product manufacturing type 2 post-extraction facilities. So what this looks like is a tool to help sharpen the developer's knife. It does not attempt to hide what I perceive as biased support for a development company and almost flippant disregard for people, animals, the environment, homes, and families. We believe that this development is wrong fundamentally from an ethical public policy making perspective and from a practical perspective of viability. This amendment seems to be a shameless continuance of what at times is a tradition of rubber stamping developers' wants. Passage of it or a rezoning would certainly result in a referendum. I truly hope that this council somehow will be part of a new trend, one that is more progressive, forward-thinking, and honoring of what really matters to people and to cities. The shambles that Sunshine Street is from Campbell all the way to Highway 65, and the empty buildings and the buildings in disrepair that dot the commercial sections of these major thoroughfares clearly demonstrate that it is time for forethought rather than the worn-out rubber stamp, and it's time for caring about people above corporations and the illusion of economic gain for city coffers. Thank you, and thank you very much for truly considering my remarks.
Questions for Ms. Heeman? Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I call my next speaker, I just want to make you aware we may have it back. If for some reason the timer is not showing up, I will have a yellow card at 1 minute and a red card at time if we can't get this working again.
Thank you.
Glenn Green.
Council, my name is Glenn Green. I'm an attorney representing my parents, Walter and Kay Green, who reside at 1055 East Kingsbury, located in University Heights. As I've mentioned before, my parents have been there over 50 years. They are in opposition to this proposal, even with the amendment. I won't go back through my arguments against the overall application of the developer, as they were extensive, and the mayor has indicated we need to address the specific amendment. I would just say that I outlined several arguments against this overall proposal, and there's not anything that this amendment or proposed amendment would address any of those concerns. And thus, it is still improper, I think, for this to be approved. Still is inconsistent, as I've indicated in previous arguments, and therefore we would suggest that the council should vote down the amendment and the overall proposal. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Green? Sir, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Evelyn Mangan.
Good evening.
I signed up to speak in favor of Mr. McGull's amendment, and that's what I shall do, with qualifications. First, I would like to remind the mayor that when this matter first started in 2022, he mentioned the grandfather's house proposal and stated, "We have to get this right this time." While I don't know what the mayor considers getting it right, I wholeheartedly agree with him. You do need to get it right this time. Mr. McGull has proposed an amendment which purports to address some of the concerns of the neighborhood. I agree with Mr. Hosmer that the amendment as before you is poorly drafted and has enforceability issues. Nonetheless, it's better than nothing in my opinion, and therefore I urge adoption of the amendment, although not necessarily the final proposal. I submit to you that the better course of action for this council at this time would be to send this matter back to Planning and Zoning for refinement before voting on the amendment or the actual rezoning. It is my understanding that a dialogue has finally been established between members of the neighborhood, the developer, and others. The changes proposed thus far are indicative of that dialogue. I hope that there is more common ground to be found before a final vote. I am not so naive as to believe that the property in question will remain single-family forever. While it is true that some members of the neighborhood will continue to be opposed to any zoning other than single-family, I suspect that there are others who see the handwriting on the wall and want to be assured that the neighborhood that we know and love and which we want to continue to call home will not be forever changed. To me, that's what getting it right means. I also understand that certain council members are frustrated with the length of time that the matter has been pending, but that should not be the basis for moving forward to a vote on the amendment or the ultimate question while there are ongoing discussions between the developer and members of the neighborhood. You do need to get it right, and getting it right requires that equal consideration be given to the developer and to the neighborhood, irrespective of how long that takes. Please keep in mind that a decision now can ultimately cost more in time and resources than taking this opportunity to get it right. Please do whatever is necessary to get it right.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Mangan? Thank you.
Maggie Castry.
Good evening.
My name is Maggie Castry, and I live at 1006 East Linwood Drive. Mr. Mayor, City Council members, thank you for the opportunity to comment on this amendment. It's an amendment that weirdly addresses only some random comments made at the end of the last City Council hearing. It does nothing to address any of the neighborhood's frequently stated concerns to the requested rezoning to general retail, which makes me feel like our concerns are being pushed aside and ignored. We have been offered only toothless, meaningless measures like this amendment that do not remedy our concerns, namely the inevitable increased traffic through our neighborhood, reduced property values, environmental impacts, and damage to our walkability and quality of community and place. For our neighborhood, this amendment is irrelevant to our concerns. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Castry? Thank you, ma'am.
Holly Acharya.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Holly Acharya, and I live at 972 East Linwood Drive in University Heights, and I'm opposed to this amendment. The issue that our neighborhood has had with the rezoning all along is that general retail with the COD is too intense of a zoning change. It doesn't fit with our designated place type in the comprehensive plan, and I don't believe this amendment does enough to make us and our neighbors feel secure about what would be able to be developed on that corner. It's been pointed out to us many times that the rezoning and COD becomes city code and it's enforceable, as this amendment would be, but it's also changeable. You know, we could be back in this process again to make incremental changes down the line, and those incremental changes would probably take a lot less than 2 years, and those changes are never going to go back in this direction of being more restrictive. So I think once we take this first step of rezoning, that's the direction it's going to go, and it's going to continue to expand. And so that's why I don't think that this first step should be such a big leap. I don't think, and it's also why I don't think the amendment is enough to protect our neighborhood. It doesn't change the fact that the application is still for general retail, even with the COD. We are a diverse neighborhood. We have diverse opinions about what would be acceptable on that corner, but in the comprehensive plan, our current and future place type designation is residential neighborhood traditional, and we've given many reasons that we disagree with this zoning and don't feel that this amendment does enough to address our concerns.
Question for Ms. Acharya? Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Carney.
Good evening, Council.
Good evening.
I actually don't have anything to add to my neighbor's eloquent speaking on this amendment and the ultimate decision about rezoning, except to say that our neighbors are very well versed on what's been said here and what they've read, and I don't know of any exceptions that say, no, we don't want this amendment. It doesn't alter anything as far as we're concerned for the rezoning question. That's all I have. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Carney? Sir, thank you.
Barbara Suzanne Robinson.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Robinson. I live at 1010 East University Street, and I've lived there for approximately 27 years. In response to questions on October 7th from Mr. Hosmer regarding whether the neighbors have been informed, we heard Mr. Childers and Mr. Gage and other city staff members refer to changes made by the developers as changes desired by the neighborhood. There have been several individuals talking to Mr. Duda who absolutely do not represent the feelings of the neighborhood.
Ma'am, let me ask you to address the amendment only.
Okay. Well, but is there not a link when they're saying these are things desired by the neighborhood?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Focus on the amendment, please.
Yes, we have 16 households within 185 feet of the proposed redevelopment who signed protest petitions against rezoning. Most of those are homes that are owned and are by individuals and owner-occupied. We have hundreds of pages of letters to Planning and Zoning and City Council from neighbors and residents of University Heights against rezoning. Out of the hundreds of pages of letters, perhaps 1 or 2 letters were in favor of any rezoning. Also, the vast majority of neighbors speaking at P&Z and City Council oppose rezoning. My basic objections to this amendment and overall rezoning is that the change of place type, which is in this, from forward SGF to something other than traditional neighborhood, and the code requirement of a minimum of 5 acres for general retail, and this amendment does nothing to change any of that. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Robinson? Thank you, ma'am.
That was our final speaker.
In that case, the public hearing on the amendment is declared closed. Now in front of council is the bill as amended, so it is now open for questions or comments from members of City Council on the bill as amended. Ms. Horton.
And thank you to all those who came out to speak and kind of give your perspective on this again. I think that we're far enough into the adoption of the comprehensive plan, 2 years, going on 2 years now, that we can responsibly or reasonably expect applications to conform to the comp plan as it exists today. When I looked at the forward SGF map and read through the background explanation of the bill, this application doesn't seem to conform well, because if it did, we would not be proposing changes from traditional place type to institutional and employment center place type. Consequently, the map shows that this area is to be a traditional place type, which I interpret to mean that the applications should reasonably expect predictable legislative approval for the following types of proposals that are permitted under a traditional place type, and that is low-intensity commercial uses, parks, low-density multifamily, single-family residential. As restrictive as the COD elements may seem, we could argue that the 39 restriction or restricted uses fall into the scope of low-intensity commercial uses called for in the traditional place type. Nevertheless, the appropriate first step, in my opinion, to offer suggested changes to the place type is during a corridor study period where ground level thoughtful planning and explanation can occur with public feedback, not during a legislative process where decisions are codified. In my estimation, I can tell that some assumptions about property acquisition, demolition, and rezoning were made on the part of the applicant that are not panning out with little guarantees from the get-go. And this may be why the developer has been amenable to further restricted uses and paying for traffic improvements. And at the same time, I can also tell that there is no general neighborhood consensus in opposition of commercial development at this corner. The response essentially is mixed. With that said, I did support the moratorium then in 2023, and I would support it now, especially since City Council approved funding for the Sunshine Corridor study July of this year. And at the same time, when a planning and zoning commissioner appealed for help from City Council by recommending a neighborhood plan, I could see why the developer thought it may not have been fair. But between then and now, as we read the background of this council bill, the applicant withdrew the application October 2022, postponed the application until April 2023, withdrew again January of this year, and was denied 3 times by planning and zoning. And all of this time, some thoughtful planning could have been taking place. So in this case, the delay with the applicant is not on the city, but if there's going to be further delay, let's use the time to get this right, because there is not a consensus in the neighborhood to prohibit development of this corner. Some would welcome it, and if given the opportunity before development occurs, city staff can get some valuable feedback in favor of low-scale commercial development. So therefore, my vote is not in opposition to the developer, but the proposal, nor is my vote aligned with the no development at all on this corner camp, but my action is an affirmative vote for the strategic plan of the city for this neighborhood that is designated as a traditional place type. Thank you.
Mr. Jensen?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Those were some great thoughts, Councilwoman Horton. I have some comments that I don't think are going to make really anybody happy, but this has been an incredibly difficult process, and I think all sides can agree to that. There's certainly been learning opportunities, but I feel like it is ultimately our responsibility to ensure that we're maximizing consistency with the comprehensive plan, and engaging in thoughtful and inclusive legislative processes. So since the last meeting, I've attempted to work with neighbors, with the developer, and with city staff to figure out a path forward to increase the consistency of this application with the comprehensive plan to address as many of the concerns as the neighborhood has identified. I recognize the valid concerns that neighbors have about the encroachment of non-residential development into a neighborhood. Our comprehensive plan specifically identifies the value of the aesthetic of National Avenue. And so I think we, as a council, have a responsibility to make sure that when we are supporting redevelopment and adaptive reuse, which our community is going to face a whole bunch of in the future as we face limited opportunities for outward expansion, we have got to figure out the right way to make sure that as we support increased density in neighborhoods and increased commercial activity, and let me be clear, I don't think any neighborhood is going to be free of increasing density in commercial development, but we have to make sure that it is done thoughtfully, it's done in alignment with the comprehensive plan, and that it supports both the private interests of the folks that are putting money on the line to develop the property and the folks who are going to live with whatever goes there. The neighborhood also identified a concern about the impact of traffic. I think staff have done a really great job of being as responsive to that as possible. But regardless, it calls on us to make sure that we're allocating our resources appropriately to fund the types of improvements that our neighborhoods need to see. We can't expect developers to bear the cost of all of those improvements. It's never going to be possible to make it balance out. So that's just, I'm very hopeful for what occurs in November, and that we'll have the types of resources to do these types of projects. I also recognize the concern that the neighborhood has identified in terms of architectural standards, and I do believe that the developer has made a good faith effort to develop architectural standards that are enforceable, that clearly identify the elements that make University Heights, and ensure that that transfers over into the development. I also recognize the position of the developer. If we look at the comprehensive plan, it does identify low-intensity neighborhood commercial as an appropriate use within the traditional neighborhood place type. So by approving a rezoning that allows that type of development, we are being consistent with the comprehensive plan. But whenever we have those high friction interaction points where you're going from a major institutional use immediately to a single family residential, the comprehensive plan gives us really clear guidance for how to reduce that friction as much as possible. So it calls out adaptive reuse of existing historic structures to preserve the visual integrity. So as we look at development pressures creeping north along National, making sure that we're preserving those structures, even if we have to allow conversion to multifamily with internal subdivisions of some of those beautiful houses or to commercial uses. That may be where the market takes us one day, and we have to be responsive to it. But preserving the visual integrity of the corridor and the neighborhood is clearly called for in the comprehensive plan. Another solution for reducing that friction point is to incorporate mixed use and residential components into these developments. That ensures that whatever goes there is going to be something that improves the livability enough that new folks are going to want to move there in addition to the residents that are going to live nearby. I had worked with at least some members of the neighborhood, and I absolutely recognize that there is not a consensus that I think we're going to be able to find amongst this neighborhood. And I worked with the developer, and I was hopeful that we could find a path forward. But as it stands, the process itself and the codes that we have in place don't allow for this kind of creative problem solving that our comprehensive plan really demands that we be utilizing. I struggle with how to vote on whatever we move forward with tonight. But if I can offer just one more comment, I want to talk about the importance of civility. This has been an incredibly difficult process. Like I said, everybody has a vested interest in the outcome of this rezoning case and whatever may happen in the future. But both sides have really great people that are trying to do great things for the city. And I think both sides have people that have made really harmful statements, both to themselves and to this process. And I want to be clear that our city should not have any space for those types of activities. That is not how we should be working with developers. That is not how we should be working with neighborhoods. And so I know that hopefully everybody has learned through this process what good development and good development processes look like. I also think it's taught me that we need to take a look at our processes that have major types of impacts like this and determine if there's a way to build into our consultation process a formal consultation, perhaps through the planning neighborhoods department, where we are both training neighborhoods on the types of feedback that we can receive, what are valid reasons to reject a rezoning case, and then provide a system for them to be able to provide that feedback. That's not something we can address today, but I think it's a comment that's important, especially as we look at processes in our codes moving forward. So that's really what I'm struggling with. And I would be very interested to hear other council members' thoughts on the importance of balancing what the comprehensive plan demands of us and having a fair and efficient process.
Ms. Hardinger.
Thank you. And thank you to my fellow council members for their comments. So after giving this issue really careful thought, I will have to cast a no vote tonight. While the amendment was a step toward compromise, it's very clear that this rezoning process has failed, not just for the neighborhood, but for the developer and the city as a whole. In my opinion, this case has exposed some serious flaws in the current process of how we handle rezoning cases, and it is a reminder that we need to do better. So Councilwoman Horton said it well. My vote against this bill is not a vote against the developer, nor is it a statement that nothing commercial should ever be developed on this corner. I agree that we need to find the right approach to benefit all parties involved. I also believe that everyone here is committed to making Springfield a better place to do business. I hope we can move forward with a clear vision as we continue to implement forward SGF. I also want to take a little bit of time to thank everyone who's contributed to this discussion, and I look forward to the important work we have of improving this process for the future. Thanks.
Mr. McGall?
Thank you, Mayor. I too believe that this process has been difficult, but it's not the first time I've ever dealt with this. I've dealt with this when I was a former mayor in Pleasant Valley, Missouri. And the thing that, in my approach to all of this, is even before we take office, the first thing we must do is swear our allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and our allegiance to the Constitution of Missouri. I look over those documents constantly in my line of profession. I keep a pocket Constitution with me all the time. And tonight I have the Missouri Constitution in front of me. And I just want to read Article 1, Section 2. And it kind of defines for me my role in government. In Section 2 of the Missouri Constitution says, it is entitled Promotion of the General Welfare, Natural Rights of Persons, Equality under the Law, and Purpose of Government. And it reads that all constitutional government is intended to promote the general welfare of the people, that all persons have a natural right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, it goes even further, and the enjoyment of the gains of their own industry. That all persons are created equal, are entitled to equal rights and opportunity under the law. And that to give security to these things is the principal office of government. And that when government does not confer this security, it fails in its chief design. When I read that, I think about the land that was purchased by an individual, a fellow American. That individual purchased that land, invested in that land, gave value to that land. The city wasn't at that closing. The city didn't give a dime for that land. And no one else in here was at that closing. That individual American has a right to pursue his or her dream. Now, there was concessions made and a lot of discussion. But where do we draw the line on when people or when certain people in the community can have their dreams, their pursuits actually come to fruition? There was a time when emotion kind of drew us to the point where people of my color couldn't even purchase land. And because we didn't follow the Constitution, we followed our emotions. And that's what I think we're doing here tonight. There was plenty of opportunities to sit down with that developer and come up with something that was a compromise. That's what we do in America. We compromise. We make concessions. And I think it's un-American for us to tell our neighbors. I can't go to my neighbor and say, I want you to paint your house a different color, or I want you to do this to your property. I can't do that. That's un-American. This man purchased this property, and he gave value for this property. He wanted to develop it. He tried to work with the citizens, but that didn't work out. I'm just saying, as an elected official, it is always my duty to follow the law. And the law says that government should give security to those people who are pursuing their dreams. And as I think about this tonight, I think about Langston Hughes' poem about dreams deferred. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun or fester like a sore and then run? And my adage to that particular poem is this: do we dispatch progress to another city, or we become the donut hole in the middle? If we drive off development, if we drive off people who have big dreams, they'll go somewhere else. They will. So that's where we are tonight, and I think I can do the math. I mean, I know that's not going to pass tonight, but we have to think about our role in government and what we're here to do. We can make concessions. We could come up with compromise to make both the development as well as the citizens happy. I think we failed in that tonight. Thank you.
Does any other council member desire to be heard? Seeing none, Ms. Cotter, please call the roll. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote no.
Lee,
Aye.
Jensen,
No.
Horton,
No.
McGall,
Aye.
Simpson, Hosmer,
No.
Hardinger, Carroll,
Aye.
McClure.
Aye. The bill having not received 6 affirmative votes, bill as amended fails. No display of emotion at all. Now, as we begin discussion of